Good afternoon, I'm Cherie from Re Inc. and welcome to this session on Cyber Futures as part of Garen Imperva Live Festival of Innovation. Thanks to our partners at Imperva for making this happen today. Over the next hour, we will hear from global leaders on current and future cyber threats and their effects on the citizens that we serve. First up, from NTT Corporation Tokyo's Chief Cybersecurity Strategist presents on current and future cyber threats during this pandemic. Please welcome Mihoko Matsubara.
Thank you for having me. So
Over to you, Miho. Hi, Miho.
Hi.
It's all yours.
Thank you. So thank you for having me. So I'd like to talk about the current future cyber threat landscape during the pandemic. So we unfortunately see more and more cyber threats during the pandemic, and I see that there are three reasons why we see a growing number of cyber threats. So we spend more time online due to the travel constraints, and we are anxious to learn about the current situation or the latest statistics about the pandemic or our work. So actually it pushed the ratio to click the phishing emails or links or attachments more. So the click ratio was under 5% before the pandemic had started, but actually it went up over 40%. So there's a huge difference before and after the pandemic started. And because we are more reliant on IT and especially crowd collaboration tools, so as what we are seeing doing now for the video conferencing, so actually it expanded our attack surface, and we see 600% increase in cyber attacks on search or crowd collaboration tools. And because of the recessions due to the pandemic, unfortunately, many organizations had to cut down their cybersecurity budget. And in fact, 40% of global organizations had to shrink their cybersecurity budget due to the recession. And if you take a look at the current cyber threat landscape, we see two particular sectors in the industry face more cyber attacks these days, education and healthcare sectors. So unfortunately, even before the pandemic had started, the education sector and healthcare sectors had a lower cybersecurity maturity level before the pandemic, as you can see from this NTT's 2020 Global Threat Intelligence Report. And because of due to the lower cybersecurity maturity level, they are more vulnerable to cyber attacks such as cyber espionage or disruption by ransomware attacks. And according to Microsoft, in fact, 60% of cyber malware attacks attack education sector, and 5% target the healthcare sector. So it's already 65% targeting the two sectors, education and healthcare sectors. And considering how much the crucial the healthcare sector is during the pandemic, you can see the daunting impact, negative impacts on these cyber attacks and cybersecurity on these sectors. And there are already multiple examples of the incidents targeting the healthcare sectors and the education sectors. So for example, ransomware attack hit the University of California, San Francisco, and because the attackers held the mission critical data for the University of California, San Francisco, so they had to pay over $1 million as a ransom to recover the missions. And those ransomware attacks do not necessarily just focus on universities tackling with COVID-19 related research or vaccine. They actually also target high schools and other schools, because those schools also have to more reliant on IT for online schooling, and 4 months ago, a Japanese high school was hit by a ransomware. So we see these types of ransomware attacks on the universities and also schools everywhere, especially in the United States and Europe. And also we see, unfortunately, cyber espionage against the healthcare sectors, especially COVID-19 related research healthcare institutions, because increasingly cyber attackers target COVID-19 related research, especially vaccine, because why? The vaccine can make a huge difference to how quickly to recover from this recession and also from this pandemic, to take a power in this world. And also, even though that we see more warnings and also cyber attacks and incidents in Europe and the United States about cyber attacks on the healthcare sector, the Japanese Ministry of Health and Labor and Welfare issued the warnings to the Japanese healthcare institutions to watch out for cyber attacks on that sector. Because if it happens, then it will be a daunting and negative impacts on not only on the healthcare sector, but also our welfare and the safety and security in the society on all. And to tackle with these challenges, we have to make sure to raise awareness and also to enhance cybersecurity for remote workers. But unfortunately, even though that organizations in the Asia Pacific region realize we do not necessarily have a sufficient cybersecurity for remote workers, they do not necessarily have had provided cybersecurity training for remote workers, as you can see from this CrowdStrike statistics came out a couple of months ago. But we still see some silver lining. We have still some good news because after we started to see more and more cyber attacks on the healthcare sectors and education sectors, thousands of cybersecurity professionals around the globe stood up voluntarily to launch alliances and coalitions to share cybersecurity intelligence and also cybersecurity tools and also incident response support for impacted healthcare institutions, such as COVID-19 Cybersecurity Intelligence League or COVID-19 Cyber Threat Coalitions. And there have been also multiple private companies willingly to share free cybersecurity tools and incident response support, including NTT. So we really need to continue this momentum, even though this has been really difficult year for everybody on this planet. But because we are now more reliant on IT and we actually know more about and how to use IT, so we are more feel comfortable about the sharing our insights and best practices and cybersecurity intelligence on COVID-19 related cyber attacks. So if we continue to do this, then we can actually alleviate these ongoing cyber threats, taking advantage of the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Miho, for sharing these incredible statistics and insights. Next up, we have Beatriz Silveira, SVP of Cyber Intelligence Center, Regional Head and ASPAC at Citi, and she'll be presenting on deepfakes and cybercrime in the FSI industry. Beatriz?
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Hi.
I'm super excited. Coming after Miho and all the statistics of the reality. I'm going to leave the time with you so that you can take us forward.
For being here. So the abuse of technology has been impacting victims and the society worldwide. For example, in terms of economic impact, the cost of cybercrime to companies is estimated to be at $8 trillion in the coming years. Also, cyber attacks are among the top 10 risks in terms of likelihood and probability, and impact, according to the World Economic Forum. So what should we do about it? And as an intelligence professional, my answer is we need to understand the cyber threat landscape. We need to understand the cyber threat landscape, aiming to identify the appropriate countermeasures, not only for improving organization's security posture, but also to boost resilience. So today I will talk about one emerging cyber threat trend, which is the abuse of artificial intelligence and machine learning to enhance cyber attacks. For instance, there are applications in which with around 10 clicks, a person can create a deepfake, what means that it's possible to create a video of someone saying or doing something that has never happened. And what's deepfake? Deepfake is a composition of the terms deep learning, one of the branches of artificial intelligence, and the word fake. It's an artificial intelligence-based technology that manages to combine the face of one person with another, falsify their gestures, and include a voice with a similar accent, all to make us believe that someone is doing or saying something that they haven't done. We can identify occasions where the use of deepfake is beneficial, for example, for movies and museums. A museum has brought to life a famous artist to welcome their guests, and it was truly amazing. Everybody was very surprised to see. But there are also many opportunities for technology abuse. So what I say is that technology can be used and is wonderful, but can be abused by threat actors. And the abuse can be, for example, through disinformation campaigns, defamation, and also highly targeted electronic frauds. Last year, it was reported in open source that one executive of a company, he received a call, and he was believing that it was another executive from the same company asking him to authorize a transaction. Believing, trusting, he authorized the transaction. And later it was discovered that it was a fraud, specifically a case of a voice impersonation. And the company supposedly lost their money. Open source reports also mentioned that it was not an isolated incident. That the threat actors impersonate the voice of companies' executives with AI programs that have been trained with hours of their public available speeches in online channels. So this is one thing that we need to think about. Where are our digital footprints? Are we aware about how much content we are putting available online? And you can also ask me, so what can we do to build trust in times of deepfake? What we can do about it? I always say that cyber awareness is the key factor. Understanding that threats enable decision makers to take better decisions, not only in the business, but also in daily life. All of us, we are decision makers in our daily life. So it's really important to inform our communities, our partners, our decision makers, aiming to influence them to adopt a more secure approach while navigating the cyberspace. So, for example, awareness is not just about training, it's about influencing a change in a behavior to adopt a more cybersecurity posture, what we call enhance the cyber hygiene levels. Also, I like to mention other key factors are the partnerships. Sharing information is crucial to keep cyberspace safe. As one cyber attack attempt blocked by one organization can be, for example, a prevention for another organization. To face next level threats, we need to be cyber aware and together. And to build trust in a deepfake era, this is even more necessary. Thank you. I start to receive a lot of messages I'm seeing. Thank you so much.
Those of you who are following on Facebook, Beatriz has Thank you, Beatriz. Thank you very much. Coming up next, we have current and future cyber threats and their effects on the citizens we serve. I'd like to invite Dr. Kubo Mačák, legal advisor to the International Committee of the Red Cross. Dr. Mačák, please.
Hello, and hello, everybody. Thank you. Hi, thanks, and thank you to the organizers for the invitation. Greetings to everybody from Geneva. I actually took a picture of where I am. Maybe we can show it on the screen. So this is, it's not live, unfortunately. It's the picture that I took when I started working for the International Committee of the Red Cross. And at the moment, I'm just next to this beautiful building. So this is the former Hotel Carlton, and now it's the seat of the International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC, in Geneva. So the organizers asked me to talk about current and future cyber threats and their effect on the citizens we serve. And so I thought, well, that gives me a good opportunity to actually think about these terms before I zoom in on the specifics of the work that we are doing in the legal division at the ICRC. So first of all, who is the we in this sentence? From our perspective, we, the organization. So the ICRC, if many of our listeners will know, is an international and independent and impartial and neutral humanitarian organization. It's one of the oldest such organizations in the world, established already in 1863. And what does it mean? Who are the citizens that we serve? Well, we don't normally use the term citizens, as that implies a relationship, sort of a vertical relationship between a person and a state that they belong to. But we see our constituency as more global. So in line with our mission and mandate at the ICRC, the beneficiaries that we work with, that we focus on, are victims of armed conflicts and of other situations of violence around the world. And now, of course, we are in the 21st century. So when we talk about armed conflict, that has to entail in itself all sorts of military capabilities that are being used, including military cyber capabilities. And also when people speak about violence, they often say that actually cyber threats, so the topic of today, of today's panel, often cause much more harm to humans than actual physical violence. And so what does it mean from our perspective as the ICRC to serve these beneficiaries? Well, again, in line with our mission, we see it as protecting the lives and the dignity of these persons. And we do that directly. So as the organization very active in the field, we provide humanitarian assistance, we provide medical aid in situations of armed conflict and these other situations of violence around the world. We also visit the detainees and the internees around the world. So that's the direct help that we do. But then also there is work done from here, from the HQ in Geneva, that's done more indirectly. And so what we do in that sense is we promote and we strengthen the legal frameworks that protect these people. And so, of course, this, we are an international organization, so the main body of law that we look at is international law, and within it specifically international humanitarian law, which is that body of law that applies in situations of armed conflicts. Now, moving to the beginning of the sentence, so what are these cyber threats? At the ICRC, and I'm going to move to the next slide, at the ICRC we invited a group of experts to come to Geneva 2 years ago, and then we wrote this up in a report that was published just last year on the potential human cost of cyber operations. It's a very detailed publication in which we asked these cybersecurity, technical, but also legal experts and policy experts from around the world to tell us what are the forms of human cost that cyber operations can bring to those people that we serve, in line with today's topic. And so the vulnerabilities that were identified included the healthcare sector that Mihoko already talked about, and I'm going to zoom in on that in just a moment. Also, industrial control systems, such as those that are used in critical civilian infrastructure around the world, and then also core internet services, such as the DNS. And there are other findings in the report, but in the limited time that we have, let me zoom in on the first one, on the first of these vulnerabilities. And I would just emphasize that that's something that at the ICRC we were saying quite some time before the current pandemic, which has accentuated the needs in this area much more. So, when you think about the healthcare sector, of course, you know that there is an increased digital dependency. There are many digital devices. There are many tools that we can now use that are improving the work in this sector, but they are also increasing what we call the attack surface in this sector. And so our experts pointed out already in the report that this sector is particularly vulnerable to cyber attacks and to specific forms of cyber incidents. And then as the COVID-19 pandemic started to spread around the world, we saw many reports of increased numbers of incidents, whether ransomware attacks, whether distributed denial of service attacks, whether other forms of cyber intrusions from around the world, which have caused coronavirus testing facilities to have to either halt or postpone their operation, which have interfered with the functioning of hospitals around the world. And so if you think about it, if one of your loved ones needs to go to a hospital, and particularly at this time of crisis when there is a lot of strain on many of these medical facilities, and they are unable to get the services that you would expect because the hospital has come under a cyber attack, then that causes a huge amount of distress, or in the terms of our report, it causes this human cost. So because we're lawyers, we can't solve it technically, and there are others on this panel that can talk much more qualified ways about the technical solutions. From the legal perspective, what we have done at the ICRC was to conduct an analysis of how international law, the existing international law that we already have, protects hospitals and other medical facilities from cyber attacks. Now, I'm not going to go into much detail because our time is limited, but in summary, the outcome of our analysis conducted with my colleagues here in Geneva was that actually international humanitarian law, so the law that applies in times of armed conflict, is more comprehensive, and it protects medical units, transport, and personnel at all times. So that means that in situations of armed conflicts, there is comprehensive protection, which we argue at the ICRC also covers cyber attacks, because our position is that IHL as a body of law also applies to cyber operations that are conducted during armed conflicts. Now, on the other side of this equation, in situations of peacetime, it turns out that the law is a little bit more complicated. Certain types of cyber operations, such as those that result in the deaths of patients, or those that force another state to change the course of action that it otherwise would have taken. So, for example, if a state intervened in another state with the aim to make that other state release a vaccine that it has produced, those types of operations would be clearly prohibited by existing international law, and most people agree with this. But lower level cyber intrusions, such as the example that I mentioned, such as an operation against a coronavirus testing facility that doesn't have an doesn't cause immediate injuries or immediate loss of lives, there the situation, the legal analysis is a little bit more complicated. And so because of that, we expressed in our analysis we wrote it up and it's published, so viewers can find it. It was published in this US blog called Just Security. So we expressed our hope that this is this moment of crisis is a moment for the international community to affirm that international law comprehensively prohibits cyber operations against medical services. So not just in situations of war, not just in situations of armed conflict, but also in situations of peace. Now, luckily, we were not the only ones that came out with strong statements in support of this view. In May 2020, there was an important open letter published by 40 global personalities that have included several Nobel Peace Prize laureates, that have included the former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and leaders such as Mikhail Gorbachev and Madeleine Albright, who called on all governments to work together to stop cyber attacks on the healthcare sector and to declare that such cyber operations are unacceptable and unlawful. Then very soon after that, we have seen, or actually a few days before, still in May 2020, we have seen a statement published at Oxford, but signed by a large group of over 100 international lawyers from around the world, which have quite closely aligned with the views that we have expressed about the international law protections that international law offers or affords to medical facilities. And then perhaps most importantly, even states started coming on board. And so already two informal meetings of the UN Security Council were organized this year in May 2020 and in August, so just a few weeks, about 2 weeks back, in which a growing number of states expressed their view that health infrastructure should be considered a part of critical infrastructure and, more importantly, should be considered as protected from cyber attacks. And so, this is an area that will certainly continue to develop, but I think it provides a good example of the work that we are doing at a legal level, at the level of humanitarian diplomacy at the ICRC, engaging with states on a bilateral and multilateral level, and trying to promote these views about the protections that international law offers. So, in a nutshell, just to summarize, to answer the question, how do we try to serve the people that we work with or that we focus on when it comes to current and future cyber threats? The answer is that the ICRC approach is to first follow the technological developments, so understand the threats that we are facing at the moment. That includes threats from modern technologies and from cyber tools. Then secondly, assess their potential human cost, which is something that we have done comprehensively in our report that I mentioned earlier. And then if needed, work on the clarification and development of the law. So to show where the gaps might be, and then work with the states, focusing on how these gaps could be filled. So that's what I have to say at this moment, and I look forward to the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Kubo. We have, from Mihoko to Beatriz, we looked at the threats and the realities of, I think, the cyber threats. I think with Kubo, we understand the impact of all these threats on our daily lives. And I'd like to invite someone who can maybe shed a little bit of light on end of that spectrum, what can be done. We've got a company that helps nations gain insight on their data protection. I'm pleased to introduce Garen Ling, Regional Sales Director of Imperva. Garen?
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Thank you, Gulf Insider, for the arrangement and having me in this Cyber Future session. My name is Garen. I'm the Regional Sales Director of Imperva, based out of Singapore. Dr. Kubo is based in a fantastic place in Geneva, right? So I'm taking care of the business in the region, right? So before I begin, I would like to give a brief introduction of Imperva as a company, right? So Imperva started back in year 2002 with the first web application firewall, WAF, in short, and database activity monitoring, DAM solution, protecting your critical apps and data, right? We are recognized by Gartner as the only leader in the WAF Magic Quadrant 6 years in a row, right? So during the weekend itself, when I was trying to research what to actually present in this session, I chanced upon this phrase said by Singapore Prime Minister, Mr. Lee Hsien Loong, an extract from the Smart Nation website, which I thought is very relevant in today's context, right? So Mr. Lee mentioned that data is the lifeblood of a digital economy and a digital government. As the custodian of a vast amount of data, the government takes its responsibility of securing the data and preserving individuals' privacy very seriously, right? So worldwide government takes data privacy very seriously, and securing and protecting data is definitely not an easy task to do, right? So it is given, and we all know that data is our crown jewel. More variances of abuse is happening, and generally it takes a longer time to remediate breaches. Especially for government, ministries and agencies, it is an even bigger responsibility in meeting regulatory compliance and law. Just to name a few, like PDPA, which is Personal Data Protection Act, newly revised Singapore Government IM8 Instruction Manual Policy, PSDS-RC, which is the Public Sector Data Security Review Committee report on how to use data securely, right? And the stack is definitely changing, right? So we can see that there is more and more workloads, they are migrating to the cloud. We can see DevSecOps needs to be very agile and automated, and more utilization of microservices and APIs. So let's take a closer look at the path to your data, right? So it starts from outside your network to within your organization. And eventually, it reaches the data which resides mainly in your database itself, be it on the premise, in your data center, or in the cloud. And there's many variants and flavors of the database around, right, that we are using. So such as traditional RDBMS relational databases like Oracle, MS SQL, MySQL, to things, just to name a few, right, to big data like MongoDB, Hadoop, Cloudera, to even nowadays, right, we've seen a lot of big trends moving up to the cloud. And then we see people migrating to cloud DB as a service, like AWS RDS, Azure SQL, and Google Cloud Platform, right? So with so many variants of database itself, in order to protect the data, we need to have full visibility on who, what, where, when, how the data is being accessed, be it from your application service ID that's coming in straight to your database itself, or direct user access from the DBA's database administrator, right? So there's a very difficult problem typically security team is facing right now, right? They usually infra and DB team will not really allow security to turn on native auditing. There is a built-in function within the database itself to have the full visibility due to a big performance impact on the database itself, right? So it's a fine line between business, which is providing service to the nation, what government agency does, and security, right? So that brings us to the next slide, which is talking about where is Imperva fits and protects all the path to the data itself, to your data. Be it we talk about the WAF on-premise or in the cloud, or the DDoS solution that protects your internet-facing application, or the RASP solution, which is what we call runtime application self-protect for DevSecOps. Our approach is to complement network security and be as near to your critical applications and data as possible, right? So you can see there's a few components down here to your top right-hand corner, DAM, which is what we call database activity monitoring, database firewall, and cloud data security, all refers to the same thing on the data security. So DAM and DBF understands each and every of the layer 7 SQL queries that goes into your database without needing to turn on native auditing and no performance impact to your database itself, right? Have full visibility on all the DB audit logs that goes into your database to meet auditors' requirement, and to take a further step to implement security policies to trigger alerts and accurately block those highly sensitive and unauthorized SQL access like excessive downloads and etc. Having implemented DAM and DBF solution in many government agencies across the region, be it on-premise or in the cloud, agencies generally have a common feedback, right? So Dr. John Khan can share a little bit more as well later on, right, on how to make use of machine learning and AI intelligently to make operations more effective and for agencies to focus on the high critical security incidents. As you can see down here on the screen, BAM, just now we have talked about it, there's something called DRA, Data Risk Analytics. This is the secret sauce and uniqueness of Imperva data security solution. From the example that you can see on the right-hand side, you see that DRA consolidates many data points together, right? Joe accessing the master DB table, accounts table, and sensitive content type, which is the account number itself, and doing 50 queries to the database itself, retrieving in a totality of more than 1.5 million records, right?
Sorry, Garen. Sorry to interrupt, Garen. Sorry. Can you please reshare your screen? We're having some issues looking at your slides.
Okay, right now. Okay, wait, hold on.
Yes, yes. Sorry, everybody. Realities of
Do you see it?
Paneling from home. No, I don't on my screen.
Hold on a while. Oh, I've been through many slides already.
It's all right. We just share from where you're at.
Okay.
Yes, cool.
Are you able to see it?
Can you see it? No, I'm still. Okay, now it's loading. Cool. Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you. Perfect.
I've been through many slides. I'm sorry about that. I think
No,
I'm coming to the rest, the last of it. So yeah, I mean, those are the slides that I went through just now. Let me just go through a little bit. Modern day crown jewels. The stack is changing. The paths to your data that I covered just now. And then we talk about the cloud WAF, the WAF itself, the RASP, the DAM, DBF, just now I talked about. Just to recap a little bit, this is the one that I end off with just now on the slide itself, right? So we talk about the DAM, which is what we have in terms of the database activity monitoring solution. And then with the data risk analytics itself, right? So you can see on the right-hand side corner down here, just now I was mentioning that we're deploying many in many agencies across all the whole region itself, right? So hold on, let me just try to do a presentation mode. You can see, right?
Yes, all good.
Okay, got it, good. So just I was stopping right here. Apologies about the screen sharing just now. I don't know why it doesn't work. So you can, just now I was stopping here that, you know, you can see on the right-hand side down here, right, that with the data risk analytics DRA itself, we see the user Joe, right, accessing the MasterDB table itself. And it is a sensitive content type, which is the account number, and doing a select operations of 50 queries and in totality download more than 1.5 million records, right? So with this, it gives you a lot of context, gives the management a good overview on the most critical alerts comparing with a typical behavior baseline, right? So that's what typically a lot of management level in government agencies and ministries are looking out for in terms of not only using a default DAM, DBF, but also with machine learning and data analytics as well, right? So with this, you can see that instead of what we see here, which is hundreds and millions of events each day, which cause a lot of alert fatigues, DRA reduces the noise significantly with 12 or less insights or critical alerts per day from this real data from a large FSI customer that we have, right? So with less than 12 or less than 12 what we call critical alerts per day, it is more humanly digestible to work on. So I've come to the last of my slides to sell. Our ultimate goal at the end of the day is to secure and protect data, which is the lifeblood of a digital economy and a digital government, right? Thank you very much for your time and attention. Feel free to reach out to me on my email address, garen.ling@imperva.com if you have any questions or discussion points. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. I have everyone back for the panel discussions, but we're also joined by a sixth person today. We are now joined by Dr. John Khan, Chief Information Officer of A-Star Singapore. And I'm looking to picking everyone's brains for the next 20-odd minutes. Hi, Dr. Khan.
Hi. Hi, Cherie. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, I'm not on mute, and my video is on.
You're all good. All good. I can see you twice. All right, okay. I'm going to start off with you, Dr. Khan. Everybody has shared, so I'm going to put you in the spotlight for a little bit so that our people who are tuning in can hear a little bit about the work that you do. Can you perhaps share with us, we all know what A-Star does, by and large, especially in Singapore. Maybe you can share how A-Star has had to pivot, to deal with COVID and this new normal that we are living in.
I guess many of us are already trying to get used to the new normal, as you said, the new world order, the new thing. For A-Star, as many of you might know, we are doing a lot of research in scientific and biomedical. So our mission is to advance science and develop innovative technologies in order to further economic growth and improve lives. And especially for the second part, where we improve lives, is where if cybersecurity impacts our research or the storage, the data, the labs are involved, So this will impact the ability to say how we develop faster on vaccine test kits, like what we developed in the past, like a Fortitude and a Resolute test kits for 2.5 hours and 1 hour type of test results. We're also looking at the vaccine research as well. So cybersecurity protection is important for us, as well as the data security. For myself, even as I'm the CIO of A-Star, I'm also the Vice President of Singaren, which is a research education network for Singapore, and also a board member of the Asia Pacific Advanced Network, which was the founding father of the internet in its original state when it was first introduced to Singapore and to many other countries in the region, for what the internet has evolved today. Through my various appointments, we do a lot of exchanges of information amongst our internal staff in A-Star, as well as with external agencies and institutes of higher learning. And we collaborate with healthcare, hospitals, institutes of other high learning, R&D organizations to do a lot of research in machine learning, biomedical activities like dengue research, COVID, SARS, medtech devices, AI, IoT as well, which was mentioned by our earlier speaker, Industry 4.0, and analytics, like doing data, video, text analytics, which was also mentioned by Beatriz and Mihoko. We also focus on the green movement. We call it the Urban Sustainability Solutions, USS. So in this sense, we look at how to make things more efficient, energy efficient, use of different types of battery and power saving devices. So that falls into our research area as well.
I mean, Dr. Khan, you clearly, based on your work at A-Star and all your other appointments, you sit at the cross junction of, I think, technology and the future of, a lot of application with the medical and the healthcare sector. How has it been for you guys with COVID and all these new things, these new demands? Has that changed your research focus? And you layer that with all the cyber stuff that Niho talked about, the threats.
So I guess the research has been largely focused in the last few months on the COVID-19 test kits as well as vaccine research. So the IT systems and everything that protects the data and cybersecurity things, platforms had to be re-pivoted towards that. We continue to see phishing, malwares, scams, ransomwares, and APTs. Again, it's targeted at human beings, even though we see that many of the systems are also impacted. But the phishing scam, simple things like asking for your credentials. As you work from home, much of our systems, the home broadband networks, the routers, the modems, are not so well protected as in a corporate environment. And simple things like asking for your email or your password as you win a prize, the credential phishing causes concern because the credentials lost by our researchers can be used to target our corporate network subsequently. So these are the things that we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of telecom requirements as well, and with it comes its own challenges in protecting the systems that goes with it.
Thank you. I'm going to take the chance to segue to Beatriz. You talked a little bit about the same thing, right? The kind of threats. How is the banking industry coping with all of this before we move to Miho?
Yeah, so all of us, actually, we are working together, not only within our employees, but also regarding our peers, because our main objective is to keep safe not only our organizations, but the whole financial ecosystem. So we are working together through information sharing, intelligence sharing as well. And to do this, to be able to do this, we need to build trust and also to be keeping pace with the latest cyber threats and understand how it can affect not only our organizations, but the whole organizations and our peers.
I liked in your presentation, you talked a lot about, and I say this, increase in attacks, but lower cyber budgets, increase in use, but there's a bit less focus on education and security. How does that gel up from your vantage point, and what can companies and organizations or even governments do actually?
So we are in a big trouble because we are now facing a pandemic, and we are facing recession, and we are facing more and more cyber threats and attacks. So we have a big problem. However, as I said, we feel more comfortable about using different IT tools and cloud collaboration tools like video conferencing. So we feel more comfortable to collaborate with different key stakeholders to tackle with different cyber attacks. So as I listening to different speakers on this panel, I feel more encouraged that because different banking sectors or lawyers, and as Kubo said, they feel more comfortable to talk about the best practices and our ongoing efforts to tackle with legal issues, but also cybersecurity issues to mitigate cyber risks. So I think that even though that we are on a long journey to mitigate the COVID-19 related cyber attacks, but if we keep doing this, and if we can keep this momentum, then I'm sure and I'm certain that we can deal with this cyber.
Can I just say that it makes me very relieved that you are optimistic given everything that we have heard. And I think that's really something that all of you have in common, actually. The COVID pandemic, I think if we look at the world today, it's not just impacted the person, it's impacted the state, the economy, the healthcare, the way countries are. It's also impacted cyberspace, where we know there are no boundaries. I'm going to ask Dr. Mačák to kind of comment, really. Do we then need an international treaty for cyberspace? I mean, how's it going to work? The same rules don't apply, right? I mean, previously in as we said, normal warfare, there are like geography lines, and now there isn't. It's like a big shared space vacuum abyss.
Well, I hope not. I hope there isn't a vacuum. So, but it's an excellent question, and it is something that the states are very actively discussing, and it is also something that there is a lot of scholarship about. The question: do we need a new treaty for cyberspace? And so, there are those who say that cyber is a new phenomenon, cyberspace is a new domain, and so whenever there is a new situation, we need the new rules. But I think before we go the full way with this argument, we should pause for a moment and think a little bit, because when we talk about, what conduct of states there is and what is it regulated by, we already have a body of law that the states have agreed on, and that's international law. And so, maybe 20 years ago, when there was this discussion back then, not about cyber operations, which is the terminology we use now, but people were talking for the first time about computer network attacks. Maybe back then, states were caught unaware, and there wasn't enough expertise, and there wasn't enough understanding about how international law could apply to these new tools and new capabilities, but we are no longer in that situation. In 2013, a group of governmental experts at the United Nations level that were representing, states that were geographically diverse from all corners of the world, they unanimously accepted that international law applies to ICTs, to information and communications technologies, and that was then endorsed by a General Assembly resolution of the United Nations. So now the consensus is that those rules of international law that we have, they also apply in cyberspace. And the key question is, how specifically do they apply? So that was, one of the questions that I discussed before, was how do the rules on non-intervention, on the use of force, on sovereignty, humanitarian law, how do they apply to protections, or how do they apply to cyber attacks against hospitals? And there are a number of questions like that. So at the ICRC, to answer your question, we don't take a specific view as to whether states should agree on a new convention. That's possible that when we look at these individual questions and we will identify certain gaps in the protection, it's possible that those gaps can be later on filled by a convention. But first of all, we need to understand where these gaps are. And so that's why we encourage states to express their learned and considered views on how international law applies in cyberspace. And from our perspective, because we deal mostly with situations of armed conflict and other situations of violence, the very first step that all states should take is to acknowledge that international humanitarian law applies to cyber operations during armed conflicts. And so if they then, on the basis of those acknowledgements, if they then want to strengthen the protections that are afforded to civilians in armed conflict or to people in general in peacetime, of course, they're very welcome and free to do that. But first, we need an understanding of where exactly the gaps lie. So that's a long answer to a short question.
Well, I mean, a few things span multiple spaces like banking and finance, for example. Beatriz, you have something you can maybe shed light on for your industry?
Yeah, actually, I came from law enforcement, right? I was working for law enforcement in cybercrime, fighting for 16 years. So I got very excited with this question, and I asked it to talk. So I think it is exactly the role of international organizations, right? So I worked in Interpol as cybercrime intelligence officer in the past, and international organizations can see the big picture, the full picture. So for example, if a country sees that threat only to that country, but also if you have one international organization that is fostering the collaboration with other countries that has been also affected, if we can join the efforts, we can have better results. Not only for the actually result, for example, for arresting people, but also for mitigation, for example, reducing the threat, disrupting the threat, and maybe considering the cyber capability of the country in cyber investigations can actually have the arrest. But building this relationship is fundamental, and the organizations, international organizations, have this key role in this situation.
I mean, other than international organizations, I'm going to spotlight Gareth for a while because I want to ask you a question. You talked about regulatory compliance such as PDPA and IMA that agencies have to meet. So other than in the international world, if you look at nations and individual states, can you just maybe share from your company's point of view how is Imperva, for example, collaborating with governments about ensuring all these regulations are met?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? So when it comes to compliance, it's a tough thing to do, right? For a lot of government agencies, right? Compliance is a big thing. Data security protection is key for a lot of government agencies, but it is not easy to do compliance, right? So it is really a joint collaboration effort with a lot of agencies like Dr. John Khan, which is one of the agencies that we work with quite closely, right? And we need to identify the highly sensitive information within the environment itself, because not all database and data are built equally, right? So with that kind of identification, then we go further into doing things like auditing, security policies in place, making sure that there's a uniform approach. Be it you have the data or the database on premise or in the cloud itself, right? You have a uniform approach across, and then nowadays it becomes a bigger challenge when people start moving up to the cloud, and then now start also using the cloud native kind of database like AWS, RDSs or Azure SQLs and Google Cloud Platform itself, right? So customers are having the expectation that whatever they have on premise right now will be also applicable out in the cloud uniformly as well, right? So having said all this, ultimately, they also want to make sure that the operations are done very easily as well. So operations are key for them, effective operations, as in effective operations. So that's where just now I cover on the last part of the presentation itself, where we talk about VRA, machine learning, AI. That's how it comes in to reduce alert fatigues, to concentrate and let the management, like John, be able to focus on those that is very critical for the organization itself, right? Data security is a long journey, but definitely we have worked very closely across the region with a lot of government agencies. Yeah.
I think in all of your work, if I can just pull us back to the meta question, all of your work works you work with people who are kind of in the know with tech, right? Whether they are stakeholders or the people directly impacted. But if I just want to ask a general question, how do we then tackle cybercrime as a whole, and especially the vulnerable people who may not be very tech savvy, who may be more disadvantaged, especially with this new work arrangement? Can I just maybe cycle you through? Miho, maybe you want to start? What can we do to protect vulnerable people? What can companies and organizations do actually?
So even before this pandemic, every single country on this planet has been struggling with how to raise cybersecurity awareness and enhance cybersecurity for small and medium-sized companies, because they do not have any resources and staff and budget to tackle with cyber attacks. So, but there have been several initiatives going on to tackle with small and medium-sized companies' cybersecurity issues. So, one is to provide small and medium-sized companies specific cybersecurity solutions, so more affordable and more packaged. And the second one is to provide cybersecurity workshops specifically for small and medium-sized companies, because if you talk to those small companies, they don't even know what kind of cyber hygiene measures they should take. For instance, firewalls or strong passwords and how to configure their network. So even a tiny cybersecurity tip would help to improve their cyber hygiene. And Beatriz already talked about the importance of the cyber hygiene. And I think that that kind of approach is really needed and crucial to reach out to small and medium-sized companies to enhance cybersecurity.
When I talk about vulnerable people, I have to call our man at Red Cross. Kubo, are you around? Can we have you comment on this as well?
I am sorry. I just had to unmute myself. So yeah, I would answer this question. We don't have that much time, so let me just say two things. Number one is that, of course, as the ICRC, we work with beneficiaries of our humanitarian aid around the world. And so one of the key things that we should make sure as humanitarian organizations in general is that through providing aid, we don't make people worse off than they were before. So there is the principle of do no harm. And as the ICRC, we have issued a handbook on data protection that is becoming a sort of gold standard across humanitarian organizations that deal with beneficiaries on how to protect the data of those beneficiaries. So that's number one. And then number two, from my perspective as an international lawyer, of course, it's hard to comment on states' individual, national legislations and national cybersecurity strategies, which is something they should do, but it's not a part of our remit. But at the international level, if they commit to protective interpretations of the law, so I'll give you a specific example. In times of armed conflict, we know that states or parties to armed conflict may never direct attacks against civilian objects. That's forbidden by international humanitarian law. It's forbidden by the Geneva Conventions. But the question in cyberspace is, what is an attack? So what qualifies as an attack? And some states are going for a particularly restrictive interpretation, which is that if you interfere with the operation of a cyber system, but you don't cause any physical damage, that would not qualify as an attack. And so as the ICRC, we advocate for the alternative view, which is that the loss of functionality of a system is also included in the definition of attack under international humanitarian law. So if you ask, what could states do to protect the vulnerable? Well, in times of armed conflict, they should commit to protective interpretations of the law, such as this one. So this is a very quick example I can give.
Okay, so last question for everyone before we wrap up. What is the most urgent conversation we need to have with our families, friends, children, companies, communities, societies, countries about cyber threats and the future of cyber tomorrow? What is the most immediate conversation we must have? Can I start with Miho, and then we'll cycle through everybody?
Sure. So we really need to start having the bad guys are taking advantage of our anxiety and fear over the pandemic, and they're launching the cyber attacks related to pandemic. And each government, fortunately, has been sending the warning and best practices to how to tackle with those cyber attacks related to COVID-19 pandemic, including the Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore. So we should definitely encourage our coworkers and family and friends to look up to those best practices available online.
Okay, best practices got Beatriz. What is the conversation we need to have immediately tomorrow?
Yeah, so we need to tell them that the same risks, the same threats that we have in the real world, and that we are doing our best to be protected, for example, being at home and have alarms, we have also in the cyberspace. So we need to navigate responsible, understand that in the cyberspace, not always that what we see is true. If one offer is too good to be true, actually it will be. So pay attention and always double check.
Thank you. Kubo.
I will take it again to the international level, so to the multilateral level. The discussion that states are having, and they need to continue having, is about how international law protects civilians, protects the vulnerable against cyber attacks. And the very first step that all states should take, because some have already done it, but those that haven't yet, is to acknowledge that international humanitarian law applies to cyber operations during armed conflicts, because that will then protect civilians in times of in such situations from hostile cyber operations as well.
All right, Garen.
Yeah, now it's all working from home, right? So just now I mentioned about data security, which is one of the key things. Things are all moving up to the cloud, right? So I would say that to all those who is working from home, abide by the rules that are set up by the company, so that we will not fall into what we call the careless users or compromised users category, and always making sure that our data is well protected for companies and the government agencies.
Dr. Khan,
We're all telecommuting, and I think it will continue for some time. It won't go away in the next few months. So we have to remind our family members not to use our handphones, and make sure your home broadband has a password, and don't let your neighbor access your Wi-Fi. So a little bit of practical tips. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we wrap, I just want to have one technical question. Garen, can I just ask, because we missed a lot of your slides, how can people who want to have access to your slides get in touch with you?
I think they can probably get in touch with me. Yeah, email. Yeah, they can email me. Yeah. So
are you on LinkedIn? Can they hit you up on? Can they hit you up on LinkedIn too?
Oh, definitely. They can.
Okay, cool. So if you want Garen's slides, I know we missed part of it, so please email him, or you can find him at LinkedIn as well. All right. Thank you guys very much. Thank you all the speakers, and thank you all the AV team at the background. Please stay around because we have a very special video that we're playing. So we'll see you next time. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Cherie.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.